Support for Headline Humboldt is made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Coming up next on Headline Humboldt, the Board of Supervisors once again decides to nix the county's weed tax next year and to explore other revenue options for the future. Also, in the wake of Wednesday's congressional hearing on UFOs, we talk with science educator and experiencer David Stuss from Camosun College in British Columbia about why this is a topic we need to be taking very seriously. Coming up now on Headline Humboldt. From the top of Humboldt Hill, this is Headline Humboldt. I'm James Falk. Thanks for joining us. For the past 2 years and change, I've been producing a podcast, Neon Galactic, around the ongoing international discussions surrounding UFOs and their apparent reality, and how this question may potentially impact us as a species. While there has long been a stigma surrounding the topic, that fact is slowly changing because hundreds, if not thousands, of credible witnesses have come forward and attested to these kinds of events. Some video has been released, and according to several informed ex-government sources who've since gone public, many more remain classified. Former President Barack Obama, as well as former CIA directors John Brennan and John Ratcliffe, among others, have all now said there's absolutely a mystery to this subject that we don't understand. Credible people have seen and recorded on various instruments evidence of craft that perform maneuvers and reach speeds that are just not possible with any technology we know of. This week, a subcommittee of the U.S. House of Representatives held a hearing on the subject, and the discussion was at times surreal. What are these things? Could they actually represent some kind of intelligent life that isn't human? Could it be foreign technology? What are the governments of the world doing about it? How are scientists engaging? Next week, I'll be attending the Sol Symposium in San Francisco, where the Sol Foundation, a think tank started in part by acclaimed Stanford scientist Dr. Gary Nolan, among several others, will host a series of lectures from thought leaders on the topic. Giggle or not, this topic is serious. It's being taken as such by some of the brightest minds in the country. I'll deliver a report on the symposium when I return, so please look for that. But in the meantime, today we're talking with David Stuss, a Canadian educator from the Chemistry and Geoscience Department of Camosun College in British Columbia, about the hearing, the implications of UAP, and more. He too will be attending the Sol Symposium. But first, the news. The Humboldt County Board of Supervisors decided once again this week to aid the ailing cannabis industry by suspending the county's weed tax for the upcoming year. The tax, passed by voters in 2016 as Measure S, is proving to be a significant burden for county cannabis farmers. According to Deputy County Administrative Officer Sean Quincy, of around 1,000 active weed farming permit holders in the county, 771 of those are currently behind in their taxes. Almost $12 million is currently owed to the county, and only 418 permit holders have even signed up for a payment plan. The board also directed staff to develop a new system of cannabis taxation and voted to give farmers a break in taxes for the current year, eliminating what would have been an annual inflationary increase. The move was approved 3-1 with Supervisor Rex Bone opposed and Supervisor Michelle Bushnell recused. Despite some heavy tongue-in-cheek campaigning by members of the community, the Sequoia Park Zoo will not be acquiring a baby pygmy hippopotamus. In a release, zoo officials said, while we acknowledge that Moo Dang is undeniably charming and her antics on social media have created a frenzy, a pygmy hippo would be unsuitable at Sequoia Park Zoo for many reasons. Don't fret, however. The zoo is announcing that it has recently acquired a new red panda named Saffron. Saffron comes from the Lee Richardson Zoo in Garden City, Kansas. Born in July of 2023 to parents Charlie Jr. and Paprika, Saffron has come to Sequoia Park Zoo through the Red Panda Species Survival Plan, coordinated by the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. As part of standard procedures for all new animals at the zoo, Saffron will be cared for behind the scenes during a typical 30-day quarantine period. It might take months before Saffron is comfortable and ready for public appearances. Guests wanting to support red pandas at Sequoia Park Zoo can contribute to the Red Panda Improvement Project Fund by making a donation at redwoodZoo.org/donate. A new documentary produced by a Cal Poly Humboldt student is gaining some attention for the restoration of the abandoned warship that long haunted Humboldt Bay. The film, Guardians of a Forgotten Warship, features a group of 6 local veterans who took on the task of restoring the vessel. The film, just over 5 minutes, will screen at this year's Veterans Film Festival in Los Angeles. It was directed and produced by Ray Olson of the Humboldt Outdoors YouTube channel. Before it arrived here in Humboldt Bay, the 1091, as it's called, took part in the Battle for Okinawa in 1945, witnessed atomic bomb tests at the Bikini Atoll, and served as a medical lab during the Korean War to help prevent the spread of wartime disease. Here's a sample to whet your appetite.
We're driving in, we tend to look at the vessel to see how much graffiti is on it.
Well, when we arrive in the morning, we have to unlock the ship. Sure nobody tried to break in because it's a regular occurrence out here in Samoa. First thing we do, really, the first job is to put up the flag.
There's about 6 of us that come on a regular basis, twice a week, and we are its caretakers, and we are trying mightily to do a good job at that. So we don't get a lot of notoriety in this area because it's too far out in the middle of nowhere.
It's definitely a labor of love. It's something that we get together and as a group, we don't want to see this thing go away, and we don't want to see it rust into nothing. We definitely don't want to see it cut up for scrap. So we're doing all we can to promote the longevity of the boat and to make sure it's saved. We want to turn it into a museum, ultimately, and allow people to come on board, have functions on board, also to use it as a meeting place for other veterans.
And we should be able to concentrate on the bow next week.
Okay.
Because the weather's supposed to be.
We unlock all the locks, and we sit down and talk about the boat, talk about what we want to do.
And we decide, okay, which piece of rust are we going to work on today? And then we put it together, and then we go gather up our tools and start the generator and build some air and start to go to work.
We'll be back with Canadian educator David Stuss after this short break.
It's almost here. KEET's travel auction featuring unforgettable destinations like Italy, Paris, and Scotland. Picture yourself exploring these dream locations with 4-star accommodations and your own personal travel specialist to handle every detail. With 3 years to take your trip, you can bid with confidence and support KEET's community programs. Visit keet.org/travel and find out how to register.
Life is complicated enough. Why worry about what to do with your extra car? Skip the costs of maintaining it, storing it, insuring it, or renewing registration. Car repairs? Forget about it. Here's one easy solution to your car problem. Donate it to our station. It's fast, free, tax deductible, and if you donate, you're going to feel incredible knowing you're supporting quality programming. Interested? Just call this toll-free number or donate online. Thank you.
Here's my interview with David Stuss from Camosun College in British Columbia. We began the conversation by exploring why he and other scientists around the world are now taking the subject of UAPs very seriously.
I think from a scientific perspective, this is as interesting a topic as one could possibly imagine. The implications of it, if it turns out that any of it is true, are profound on many levels. It's interesting from a physics point of view in terms of if some of the described behaviors that have been reported, in terms of our understanding of the fundamental nature of physical reality. Seems like some of our best theories may be inadequate to explain things. There's interesting implications in terms of the origin of life. So from a biological perspective, there's interesting questions in terms of the nature of intelligence and artificial intelligence. It really goes from the top to the bottom. So profoundly scientifically interesting. From a personal point of view, I think almost everybody is curious about it at some level or other. And there's some interesting, well, it raises some interesting questions about, who we are, why we're here, what the significance of life. So very much so from both sides.
It's interesting. You know, part of what's framing our discussion today is the recent hearing they had in Congress, which was fascinating to watch and at times, like I mentioned in the introduction, surreal. In that, I mean, they were discussing things that seemed sort of like a science fiction movie and not necessarily reality. Real quick, I'd like us to listen to the introductory statement from Lou Elizondo, who was a high-ranking member of the U.S. counterintelligence services, and he had some fascinating things to say. Let's listen to that.
Let me be clear. UAP are real. Advanced technologies not made by our government or any other government are monitoring sensitive military installations around the globe. Furthermore, the U.S. is in possession of UAP technologies, as are some of our adversaries. I believe we are in the midst of a multi-decade secretive arms race, one funded by misallocated taxpayer dollars and hidden from our elected representatives and oversight bodies. For many years, I was entrusted with protecting some of our nation's most sensitive programs. In my last position, I managed a special access program on behalf of the White House and the National Security Council. As such, I appreciate the need to protect certain sensitive intelligence and military information. I consider my oath to protect secrets as sacred, and I will always put the safety of the American people first. With that said, I also understand the consequences of excessive secrecy and stovepiping. Nowhere was this more apparent than in the aftermath of 9/11, which many of us remember all too well. I believe that America's greatness depends on three elements: A, a watchful Congress; B, a responsive executive branch; and C, an informed public. Over the last decade and a half, I learned that certain UAP programs were and are operating without any of these elements. Although much of my government work on the UAP subject still remains classified, excessive secrecy has led to grave misdeeds against loyal civil servants, military personnel, and the public, all to hide the fact that we are not alone in the cosmos.
So having listened to Lou Elizondo, who has famously put his name out there and done a lot of work in terms of making this subject public, what kind of impact do you think that this might have on the broader public, on people in the sciences, or even the government in terms of actually moving toward a form of disclosure, quote unquote?
My thinking on this has actually changed a little bit recently. When I first got interested in the topic a few years back, it seemed like there was some movement towards disclosure that was going to be happening relatively quickly. And my thinking now is more that we're looking at progression towards a kind of conditioning of the public and of the scientific community towards even being able to talk about the question. So we're actually a little bit further behind than I might have originally anticipated. And so it seemed to me more the purpose of this hearing is to expand public awareness and maybe also to create something like a kind of immune response in the legislative bodies that they need to start to take this seriously, and that there may be some issues that are occurring in terms of secrecy or some of the way some of these programs in the intelligence communities and in the Defense Department, how they're structured. So more of an informational thing than an actual disclosure of what is actually known. That could be a little bit further down the road.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like this is progress, sort of acquainting people with the topic and making it sort of officially okay to begin these conversations, and then maybe eventually there might be further developments down the road. I find that interesting. So, I mean, you're an educator, and in the chemistry and geoscience department at your college, how is this discussed at all? And if so, or if not, I mean, would you count that as a kind of stigma that people talk about with education and the sciences, where if you bring it up, it can taint your reputation, or that sort of thing? Have you noticed that?
Absolutely, yeah. The stigma is clear. It's as you mentioned in your introduction, the giggle factor is always there. That seems to be something that is just kind of widely accepted. I have found that quite a few people are interested in it on a hush-hush level. So, people talk about it in private and confess curiosity and sometimes experiences with these kinds of things as well. But rarely is it mentioned publicly, and certainly not at the level of like a formal discussion, in a meeting or anything like that. So the stigma is real, but it does seem to be shifting a little bit.
How do we get past that? I mean, like, it's interesting that, like, I mean, part of what this may represent is sort of a shift in scientific paradigms. Can you talk about, like, I mean, it's sort of a broad subject, but materialism is the paradigm that seems to be operative right now. And it seems people are true believers in materialism are the most resistant to this topic. How do we begin to make people see that there are other possibilities, both ontologically and scientifically, that the things may not operate the way that we've always assumed, and maybe we need to open our minds to that kind of discussion?
This seems to me as much, even though it postures as something intellectual, it seems more of an emotional issue for a lot, even for scientists, that the reasons that are provided for taking it seriously or not, or dismissing it, are presented as rational arguments, but really there's a kind of an emotional basis to rejecting it. And so part of that, has it been the case in many other taboo subjects? It could be of the many things that our society has dealt with recently, in terms of uncomfortable issues in a variety of different ways. We don't need to get into all of them, but
It's an endless
I
list.
think it's a long list, but
Yeah.
sometimes what it seems to happen is just by conversations happening between people at a public level, there's a kind of a shift in mood, and these things become more palatable for public conversation. Under those circumstances, I think once the emotional change shifts, or that occurs at a public level, we seem to be able to have more profound conversations about things like, what are the limits of materialism? Is there something extra? But prior to a kind of internal emotional shifts, that seems for many individuals a little bit too challenging a conversation to have.
Now, one of the things that seems like happens at the meetings in front of Congress and elsewhere, a lot of it is either first-person sort of subjective kind of witness testimony, not necessarily at this hearing, but at other kinds of forums. Can you talk about why that's problematic from a scientific perspective, as basically not sufficient for some to open the question? I mean, that seems like in a court of law, that's a valid form of evidence to convince people. But on this subject in particular, that is not enough. And it's always like, well, if you see something that is out of the ordinary, we're automatically going to doubt your reliability.
This is a really, really thorny problem. And in part, there's the classic Carl Sagan quote. I can't remember it.
Extraordinary claims.
That's the one. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And that's of course true. And certainly this kind of thing is extraordinary in almost every way. And so the standard of evidence ought to be high. But we may also be in a circumstance in which we just entertain the possibility that we're dealing with something that's potentially vastly more intelligent than we are. And if you think about how humans interact when they're observing, other organisms, say, in the savannah, tracking lions or zebras or something like that behind a blind, they don't know that we're there. We may be collecting data, on them in ways that are beyond their imagination. We may be in a similar kind of situation, in which case we really have to open up our thinking about what's going to count in terms of evidence when we may be looking at something that is actively interfering with our ability to do so. And as such, a shift, maybe something like a relaxing of the kinds of standards that we would use for a double-blind scientific experiment is initially required, just for almost like a fieldwork approach to gather some information, look for patterns, and then see what kinds of conclusions we can draw on that basis. We may get to something experimental eventually, but we're not there yet.
Now, that being said, I mean, part of what plagues this issue is that people from the outside look at the people talking about it and they say, oh, they've decided it's little green men, and that there's a confirmation bias or whatever in the way that they're looking at it. But that is absolutely not the case. I mean, I've had hundreds of conversations now with you and with other people about, it's just you have to remain open to those types of things, but no one has decided that it's any one thing, but the evidence that's mounting from all of these different sources seems to point to something that may well be extraordinary, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The little green men narrative if anything, seems to have been promoted as a kind of disinformation campaign, and is very casually adopted by people inclined to dismiss it. But any investigation into it, if you spend a little bit of time looking at what people who are active in the field are talking about, you quickly realize that there's something much more complex that's going on here.
We're both going to the Sol Symposium, and I imagine we're going to hang out together. So I appreciate your company on that front.
Looking forward to it.
But let's talk about the caliber of people there. This isn't a bunch of whack jobs hanging out and sort of like, wearing funny suits and going to a Trekkie convention. These are some of the brightest, I mean, seriously, some of the brightest and most innovative minds in the world. Can you talk about just generally the type of people that are going to be attending and presenting at the Sol Symposium, and why you think it's so impressive and people need to realize that these are not fringe people and this is not a fringe topic because the brightest people are engaged in it?
Absolutely. This was actually a factor for me personally in terms of affording myself the opportunity to, or permission to think about these things and take them seriously, was observing that we're looking at like Nobel Prize nominees from the best universities in the United States, Stanford, Harvard, chairs of physics departments. We have two-star rear admirals, people who are have been held positions of tremendous responsibility in government. We have, and from a variety of different disciplines as well. So not just the sciences, but also in some of the humanities. We're seeing religious leaders. So across the board, really elite thinkers and very, very serious-minded people who have come to take this question very, very seriously. And the fact that you're seeing so many individuals from such a diversity of activities in society or sectors of society I think also attests to the fact that there's a here that needs to be taken seriously.
One of the things that I remember hearing when I first started discussing this topic with folks was that one of the major risks, or one of the groups that was probably most at risk if this turns out to be true and reveals a layer to reality that we kind of were unaware of before, were the sciences. That we're very confident, our society is very confident, and a lot of scientists are very confident in what we've discovered and the technology we've developed and what that says about our levels of understanding cosmically, right? What do you think the impact would be to science if this turns out to be true? And would this merely push us to sort of address some of the problems in terms of science by us getting blinded by sort of preconceived notions? Or what do you think would happen? I mean, how do you think that might unfold if it's true that this could represent technology and other things that are beyond what we've come to ourselves?
This it seems to me this is as if you like, as paradigmatic an example of a paradigm shift as one could possibly imagine. It's certainly clear from any kind of historical analysis that very often scientific thinkers or people of who are sort of knowledge holders in a cultural tradition, certainly since the Enlightenment, there's a sense that there's nothing really new to discover. This seems to happen over and over again, and we seem to be in a similar kind of position here. And as such, this is, I think, one of the reasons why some scientists, physicists in particular, many of them are reluctant to have a look at this. It's just like there's no room left for discovery, so why take something like this seriously? But if we take the historical lesson to heart, that really we have to stay open, and that there may be vastly more to discover, things that we don't know about how the universe is structured. The potential of this topic is to really, I think, blow our models of reality wide open to entire levels that we may have only scarcely begun to conceive of.
It's interesting that, like, some people who are allergic to this topic will say, oh, it's only a few anomalies here and there. And, once we get those ironed out, we're going to have this, sort of pervasive understanding of things. And in one of my podcast episodes, one of my guests was pointing out that it was the anomaly surrounding black body radiation that led to the quantum revolution and totally blew open the doors about how we understood reality then, and in a way, and that happened in a way that we really haven't even come to full terms with right now, right? I mean, so that's says something, I think, about where we're at and the resistance that we're facing. What do you think individual people can do to try and encourage this conversation and be useful in helping our society stay open to possibilities that have for too long been sort of denied?
At the, I guess we could look at that from the perspective of, scientists who are leading in the field, or communicators like you, or just individuals, sitting around the dinner table. And from the point of view of scientists, having the courage to sort of stand out there publicly and assert that there is something serious to consider here really gives permission. A lot of this seems to have something to do with a feeling of permission, that it's okay, a kind of an emperor's new clothes sort of phenomenon. And so, which does require a great deal of courage to sort of stand out from the pack and risk ostracization. Certainly from the for scientists, doing so publicly is quite risky. Reputation is everything in those disciplines. But around the dinner table, just having these conversations, sometimes which involves a kind of gentle, iterative feeling through, because people can have strong emotional reactions. Fear can come up. There can be a lot of discomfort around these things. And so gingerly threading one's way through, and then just eventually making the conversation okay to have. Sometimes I think you'll see a kind of a phase shift, right? So where cultural acceptance just seems to occur. We'll observe this in many instances. For example, the conversation around the LGBTQ. When I was young, this was just beyond the pale, and then there were some really rapid changes that occurred around it, and it was just that kind of sea change, which happens just from people having conversations.
And that's what we're hoping to accomplish by this type of interview and by having you on. Thanks, David. I appreciate your time and your energy and your insight. And thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity, James. Really enjoyed this.
That's it for this evening. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll be back next week. Stay tuned. Stay informed.